So I'm Kim Wright, and I'm one of the leaders in the integrative law movement, and that sort of evolved over time. I started out in law school thinking I wasn't going to practice law. In fact, I thought all lawyers were jerks. And I worked in nonprofits and ran a domestic violence program and things like that. And then one day, I was in a personal development program, and this gentleman stands up and he says, "My name is Forrest Baird, and I'm a lawyer, and I practice law in a different way. I make sure that I grant dignity to everyone in the process. And I'm a divorce lawyer, and it's my goal at the end of every divorce that the people will still be friends so they can raise their children together." And that was the moment when my life changed, and I realized there was another possibility for the law. And that's when I became an integrative lawyer. And then over time, I discovered it wasn't as easy as I had hoped, because there really were a lot of jerks. And the system was designed to create jerky behavior. And so I went from practicing to starting to speak, and then I wrote some books, and then after a while I gave up my practice so that I could actually promote this movement around the world. It's actually one of those things we're discovering ourselves. I usually just use this elephant as a way of defining it. So there's a poem, I think it's by John Sachs, on the six blind men and the elephant. And it basically goes that six blind men encounter an elephant, and they've never encountered the elephant. And so one grabs the leg and says, "An elephant is like a tree." Another says, "No, an elephant is like a snake." And the third man says, "Oh, you must be crazy. It's really like a sword or a spear." And one says, "No, fans. It's like a fan." And then another says, "No, it's like a wall." And the sixth man says, "It's like a rope." And they argue and argue about what it is, when all of them really have a piece of the whole. And for me, this is a great way of thinking about integrative law, because there are some people who enter law and they get stressed out and they get concerned for their well-being, and maybe they take up meditation or yoga and start working on sort of their inner work. Some people discover something like restorative justice, which is a way of practicing law and sort of a lens through which law can be seen. And so those people are also integrating a lot of different skills and personal growth into the law. And maybe it's conscious contracts, maybe it's collaborative divorce. There are a lot of different approaches, and I think that they're all sort of part of a whole, and we're discovering what that whole is together. Some examples of integrative law in action would be conscious contracts. Restorative justice is another example. And in restorative justice, the focus is on how do you heal the harm of a crime. And it's not just the victim that we're looking to heal. We're looking to heal the community, because when a crime happens, the fabric of the community is broken. When the perpetrator has committed a crime, it's because they are separated from that fabric. They're actually not part of the fabric of the community, and for whatever reason. And so we look to heal them as well, to help them look to see how they can make amends, apologize, and so forth. So it's a lens of looking at all of the different people. And then another example would be in the divorce area. And collaborative divorce is actually an opportunity for the husband, the wife, and the two attorneys to sign a contract together saying they're not going to court, and to bring in experts who are neutrals, who help them with the information they need to gather. So maybe there's a child expert who knows about child development and helps them come up with a plan that's appropriate for a child of a certain age. And so the collaborative divorce is another possible piece of the integrative law movement. Integrative law is one of those things where a lot of people who are integrative lawyers don't know that there's a name for it. They feel like they're just weird lawyers. And so we actually don't know how many there are. But what I can tell you is that there's some measures. So the American Bar Association, which is 350,000 lawyers out of a total of 2 million in the world, so a significant number of members. They have published a number of books, including mine. I have 2 books by them, but also others that are about this movement, and almost always they're bestsellers. And so it tells me that there are a lot of people who are interested in this who may not be showing up, on a telephone call or at a conference or something. A lot of my work is in finding those people as I travel around the world, and people tell me, "Oh, you ought to meet." You ought to meet Rob, or you ought to meet Joyce. They're doing some really interesting things, and so I go and I meet them, and very often I find that they are doing something really similar. So, like, the presence of art and law together is something that's happening in many places around the world, and they don't know about each other. And so one of my roles is to connect them with each other. I think for some lawyers, it's hard to be an integrative lawyer because you have to look inside. Like the integrative law movement is not just sort of a recipe that you check off some boxes. It's really about doing your inner work. And I think that we aren't prepared in law school for that as a general rule. And some people like that. They like that thinking like a lawyer, where you remove your feelings and you remove your personality. And so those people might not particularly like being an integrative lawyer. And so that I think is one of the barriers. And then one of the current barriers is that a lot of clients or potential clients don't know it exists, because most of what you see in the media is about lawyers fighting and making things worse instead of making things better. The integrative law movement involves a lot of looking inward, and some lawyers have taken on, for example, mindfulness meditation, and in that case, it's about slowing the chatter in the brain and having an opportunity to kind of clear your mind. Yoga is another practice, but a lot of times I work with clients that are not interested in yoga or mindfulness. They are interested in just living a whole, full life. And so I've had lawyers who I advised to sing, because that was the thing that was the joy of their life, was to sing or to paint or to do something artistic or to play with children, something that is about being a whole human being and then bringing that kind of joy of living into law practice. Not as an escape, but really as a full expression. Professional identity is a really interesting conversation in the legal profession, because when we go to law school, professional identity seems to be about removing our personal identity, and I mean putting on wigs and gowns and stopping being a human being and just becoming the advocate or the scribe or something like that. Integrative lawyers are actually human beings first, and we have a lot of compassion, and we might actually have conversations with our clients about forgiveness or apologizing or taking personal responsibility, and so when we're going to have those kinds of conversations, then we have to have those with ourselves, and so professional identity becomes an integration of personal identity and our profession. In the future, I would hope that we would have more integrative approaches. I think that the experiments that have been done have shown that a lot of these work. I'm specifically now thinking of the problem-solving court model. So in thousands of places around the world, there are drug courts and other problem-solving courts. And instead of locking people up and putting them in prison for a drug offense, the court actually helps them get clean and sober and employed and housing and finish their education and become productive citizens. And the alternative is to put them in prison and basically train them to be better prisoners and better criminals and give them more reason to be despondent and have no possibility and go to drugs, or to become actually someone who's productive and happy. And so that's the kind of thing I think courts ought to be doing. It's actually helping people and having a more therapeutic lens. There's a part of this movement called therapeutic jurisprudence, which is about looking at does this part of the law, this procedure or this policy, actually promote healing, or is it actually being harmful? I think this has a big impact on society. I think there's something about locking people up that is about kind of denying that part of ourselves. Like, most of us have done something that if we had been seen, we would have gotten in trouble. And maybe because of who we are and who our friends are, we weren't seen. Or, some of us do it more than others, and it's a matter of the law of averages. But if we are accepting responsibility for our so-called wrongdoing, our break in that fabric, and reweaving the fabric together, I think that helps society a lot, and that kind of tearing pieces of ourselves off, or pieces of our community off, and locking them up is not a very effective long-term strategy. So I think that's at least one example of the impact on society. But I think it's always, in my value system, it's always nicer to have a kinder and more compassionate and balanced approach to justice. I've been really surprised at how fast things have changed in the last few years. Anybody who's heard me speak before may have heard the story, because it's one I tell a lot. But in around 2003, I went to a mainstream bar association event, and it was lunch, and we were all sitting 8 at a table, and as they do at conferences, they said, "Introduce yourself to everybody at the table." And I introduced myself, and 7 people suddenly saw someone across the room they had to go to. So I was sitting by myself with 9 people at the tables around me, and they're looking at me like I have sprouted horns. They were frightened at the idea that lawyers could be anything other than the adversarial role that they knew about. And 6 years later, I was actually declared to be a visionary in the American Bar Association, a legal rebel, and they published my book, and it was a bestseller. And so for me, that's a nice measure of, in 6 years, I went from being, sort of an untouchable, and somebody that they were afraid that it might be contagious and they didn't want to be seen with me, to actually being recognized as someone who was making the profession better. And so if that can happen in that short a time, and then, since then it's been another, actually almost 7 years, then I have a lot of hope that progress in the next 5 years to 10 years could be really amazing. So a key part of what it takes to be an integrative lawyer, I think, is to do that work of figuring out who you are. And it's not something that most law schools do. And so it's work that has to be done sort of outside. But it's like, what are your values? And what is it that gets you up in the morning and you're passionate about it? And it's the thing that you care the most about. Andrew Harvey talks about sacred activism being the thing that if it breaks your heart the most, that's where you should be working. And so find that. And that's where to go to work in the law. You know, that purpose, that mission. If you can't find the place in your career, find that place in some other part of your life where you can express that. Because there are a lot of studies about how the key to happiness is having meaning in your life.